Welcome to the Petrichor Marching Arts Podcast, where we talk all things marching arts. My name's Bryson Teal. I'm a songwriter, composer, and mixing engineer, teaching and designing for drum corps, marching bands, and indoor percussion groups on the East Coast, as well as my mainstay school, Newtown High School in Connecticut. I'm sitting down with performers, educators, and creators to discuss perspectives on the activity, to see where it's at now and where it's headed in the future. Today, I'll be talking to Kevin Thompson about our experiences and perspectives as new and younger designers in the realm of marching percussion. All right, we're finally back. We've been in a bit of a hibernation mode because of WGI and getting all the shows ready to go for the floor and for the regionals. But we're here. I'm going to be talking to Kevin Thompson in this episode. And this was actually recorded last June, as was the first episode. So some of this information might be a bit dated in our perspective, but Kevin's actually going to be over in Connecticut for the WGI Trumbull Regional, and we're probably going to talk through more things, some updates based on things we've experienced and how our perspectives have changed in the past year. It should actually be pretty interesting. We haven't changed too much of our approach, but we've definitely come to realize a lot of things since designing our show last year that we discuss inside of this podcast. So be on the lookout for a part 2 from this one. And also, as another little plug, I do have some other episodes recorded that will be edited and put out within the next couple months. Namely Phil Andrews, who's from Connecticut originally, who you might know from Carolina Crown. He's also teaching Cap City, Phantom Regiment. And I'll also have an episode up with Anthony DeAndrea. You might know him as the quad player at the Cadets for the past several years. And he's also a local to Connecticut as well, and someone I work with presently. So super excited for those to come out. But yeah, so I'll just get along to playing this episode. Cool. So, yeah, I guess we can start. I guess we've known each other for what, probably almost exactly 10 years at this point?
10 years, yeah.
Probably, I don't know when we started drumline in high school when I was a freshman, but it's probably about around this time. We did a bunch of stuff together, went to high school and college together and marched together in DCI as well, but do you want to kind of give a rundown on just yourself in general?
Yeah, sure. As it relates to music and percussion, I've been involved with marching percussion in one way or another pretty much my whole life. I grew up playing in a fife and drum corps based out of Wethersfield, Connecticut, called Colonel John Chester. And I was doing that from pretty much as long as I could remember until I got to high school and started marching DCI. I did high school marching band, that whole thing, and marched a couple of years with 7th Regiment Open Class Corps in Connecticut, and then did 2 seasons with the Madison Scouts and an age-out year with the Cadets. It was all really good educational experiences, kind of learning a lot about different styles of drumming from what I was used to growing up. And then I went to school for music, got a couple degrees in percussion, learning more about different styles. And now I've kind of come back to my roots and doing the fife and drum thing again. I just got a job last year with the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. Doing that, went to basic training, and now I'm playing drums for a living. And it's a really great job. It's a really great experience. I'm continuing to learn more every day from the people around me, who all have their own different backgrounds, and we kind of come together to a very unique style of music that's kind of a combination of traditional fife and drum styles as well as influences from modern DCI corps style drumming, Scottish pipe band drumming, Swiss drumming. So it's a very, very good environment to just continue learning about drums and music. So I'm very excited about that.
Right on. And we've also, we've worked together in drum corps, teaching and designing, as well as a bunch of high school bands. Right now, we started working together at Newtown High School, and right now, since you're out in DC, you're kind of serving as go-to consultant at this point, I guess.
Yeah. Turned into that.
So, I mean, I think it's worked out pretty well. I mean, this past season we did everything remotely. Granted, you were in basic training for part of our design process, but in the end, things turned out pretty well for trying to keep things going from what we started there. So I guess, it was our first experience with a high school group, and even myself, too, going to Dayton, Ohio. Everyone else on staff that was there. I mean, we got to kind of see just what we were doing in a new space and kind of compare it to what was happening. And we got a lot of eye-opening experiences in several different ways. But I know we've both been pretty separated from indoor in general throughout pretty much our whole lives. I mean, we've done the high school group, so we'd never participated in indoor groups, whether it be because of time constraints and all that or whatever, especially because of music school. But I kind of want to start on what your thoughts are on WGI just in general, how you view it. I know we are kind of more DCI oriented, but as we've kind of come to this world, do you have any opinions on kind of the nature of WGI and where it's at now?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I never did indoor, and to be honest, I never really followed indoor, other than just checking out a couple lot videos here and there on YouTube once they started popping up. So my first real experience with it was not only teaching a high school indoor group, but designing the show for them.
Yeah.
So that was an incredibly difficult and uncomfortable situation, coming in and designing a show in an activity that I had no experience or exposure to really whatsoever.
Right.
And at the time, I really wasn't into it. Like, I didn't think that WGI was cool. I thought the whole idea of marching percussion inside was stupid.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's kind of the age-old argument, right? Like, why are we playing marching percussion instruments inside a gymnasium? It sounds terrible, and
right.
It doesn't make any sense. And some of that, I think, still holds true in the way I feel about it. But I think the activity, especially in the last couple of years, has really evolved into so much more than just playing drums.
Yeah.
And I've really come to have an appreciation for it as kind of somewhat of an outsider looking in on it, thinking that it's really expanding what is possible with the instruments that we play and what is possible in the activity, in the idiom of marching percussion, outside of the music itself too, like with the marching and the dancing choreography and visual representations of themes. And it's really become much more of a holistic kind of theatrical performance.
Right.
And I really dig that. I think it's awesome. I think what's happening right now with the activity is extremely inspiring on many levels, not just as a drummer.
Absolutely.
And has given me like a lot of exposure to different art forms and performance styles than I would have been exposed to otherwise as a drummer, because there's so much more to it than just the musical aspect, which is, all that extraneous stuff is, things that I have had no contact with in my life pretty much.
Yeah.
Up until checking out WGI and seeing what some of these groups are doing. So, I mean, my general opinion of it now is that I think it's awesome. I'm really into it. I follow it pretty closely now, probably more so than the outdoor activities, the outdoor like DCI and things like that.
Right.
Just because it's new and different, and it's new and different for me, and I think it's evolving at a rapid pace year to year.
So it's definitely a good time to be getting into it. There's been a lot of cool stuff. I think the first stuff I got into when I was in high school was, I think, just Rhythm X. I knew about the other groups. I just really didn't pay attention to them. I think I saw a video in 2008 when they did that show Gone. At this point, I don't know if I necessarily like it too much, but it was pretty groundbreaking to me when I saw it.
It's amazing how it feels dated now.
Yeah.
But it was really like the new cool thing.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I kind of have the same opinion on it as you. In my first podcast episode I recorded that hasn't been put out yet, I mentioned how I really am, even now, just in general, I'm not necessarily a fan, I guess, of everything that's happening. I think, like you said, it's in a great place. Like, there's a lot of great stuff happening, and I'm a fan of that for sure. But I think when I look at everything that's happening, there's still kind of this blanket that I kind of defined as like overly, I guess this can be misinterpreted, but kind of like overly sensory, where it feels like everything's all too physical in terms of the performance and the approach and the design, kind of across the board. It was the first time I got to see high schools and independent groups of all kinds, just all day long for a few days. And that was kind of my initial feeling about it. There was definitely a lot of stuff that was happening that caught me by surprise, and I was really interested in it. And I even saw some groups that kind of approach it in the same way as Dartmouth. There's a few independent groups that did a great job with that whole thing they do, taking something pretty clear cut and dry and making it entertaining, which was really cool. It's kind of how I've always felt about Dartmouth. I don't necessarily love the idea of everything they're doing, but it's not like it's bad, obviously.
In a way, they defined what the activity has become. I mean, they really were the first group to go all out on the theming, the costumes, and just a 100% kind of through and through consistent design of the show. I mean, they were doing it all before anyone else was.
Oh yeah,
and they deliver consistently every single year. So it's like why,
without a doubt,
why change when you're the best at what it is that you do?
Yeah, it totally makes sense too. I mean, the staff, all the kids are totally buying to that, and I think that's why it works so well. I mean, it's kind of gathering personalities to write that stuff, and when everyone's personality kind of fits that mold that they're making, with their expertise, it's going to be magical pretty much every time. But one other thing I thought was interesting, kind of in regards to seeing all the shows for the first time, was really fully understanding the influence of Mike Jackson and Kevin Shaw on most groups. It really came down to like, okay, everyone's writing is coming from either Mike Jackson, like John Mapes, definitely DCI people as well, since a lot of them are involved too at a higher level, like MCM and everything through the years, Rhythm X. And even you could see people doing, Colin McNutt's stuff in there too. But it was interesting to see everyone's interpretation, especially since Mike Jackson, ironically, seems like the new kid on the block, even though he's been around for so long. Having his style in everyone's group. I mean, even in our open division in Scholastic Open. But I guess with that in mind, how, as us being kind of one of those groups that does somewhat emulate what Mike Jackson and Kevin Shaw are doing, why do you think that is such a prevalent thing in WGI? Why didn't that catch on earlier? Because he has been maybe not writing the same way, but he has also been Mike Jackson and been a Hall of Famer, in WGI for a while now.
Well, I mean, I was listening to one of their podcasts a month or two ago, and he said something about, and I think this kind of defines, I mean, maybe he wouldn't want this to be the case, but kind of define how he writes and how he's always written. Even if the drumming itself and the music itself is always changing, there's just a core belief of being true to yourself where you are at that time. And just kind of using the show design as a vehicle to voice your ideas, and not necessarily trying to copy or play to trends, things like that. Like just always trying to be creative and original and human. I think they do a really good job consistently of playing to very real human ideas, emotional concepts that aren't necessarily on the nose like some other groups do, but they make you think, they make you feel. And I don't necessarily think that has changed. I mean, if you go back and look at early 2000s, like Mission Viejo shows, it was the same idea. The music was different. The playing was different because it was a different time for the activity in that sense. But I think the foundation behind what they were doing was the same. Why it's catching on now, I mean, who knows? I think it's maybe in part because they've gotten involved with the Blue Knights. But honestly, I think the activity now is just ready. It's just ready for a new change. like we talked about Dartmouth kind of defining one way of doing things over the past however many years. And so many groups kind of latched onto that style of taking something readily accessible, on the nose, like everybody can understand it, easy concepts, and then just going all out with it and producing it on a massive scale. And so many groups caught on to that, and that's kind of been the way of the activity for the past 10, 15, 20 years. And now I think the activity is ready for a change, kind of cycling back to the more nuanced ideas. And I think with what they're doing, it's just undeniable. And I think that's what people like about it. And when people like something, they're gonna try to be like that thing.
Right.
I was actually thinking about this the other day. Like, why do I try to write like those guys? I don't think I do. I just surround myself with what they're doing and what other people kind of in that similar style are doing, and because that's what I surround myself with, that's what comes out when I write.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it's just because it's like, not that being musical hasn't been a thing, but now that it's kind of almost going beyond that, kind of like you're saying, kind of inspired by human experience, especially WGI being able to give that influence. When that happens, even people that are trying to write in that similar way with that in mind, or even just feelings in mind, kind of makes everyone think about Blue Knights and Broken City in general, regardless, because it's so iconic at the moment and kind of changing what's going on. How do you feel about I guess kind of like we were saying, just the kind of the human experience side that, Broken City is approaching the activity with, and how Mike Jackson interprets that in his writing? I mean, do you think that is really, I guess, the human experience side that's really what's changing everything? It's still them playing a bunch of really cool stuff. They're achieving really high level. But as opposed to the visual side, do you think that human nature aspect is coming through in the writing? Or do you think we're just kind of projecting that idea onto it?
No, I don't think we're projecting it onto it. I think it's a very real thing. I don't necessarily know that I could like sit here and explain to you why it works, and because I'm no expert on that stuff. Like, I'll be the first person to say that I have no clue what I'm doing when it comes to achieving that level of design. But I think part of why the more intimate, to use that word kind of to sum up what we're talking about, it's an intimate show experience. And WGI is able to do that because we're in a smaller venue. The audience is right there. You're not wearing like big helmets and everything, so you can use your face, and people can actually see the emotion that the performers are portraying. And I think that's something that they capitalize on big time. I think if you watch any Broken City show for the past couple of years, like, you can listen to it, like just the audio, and you can still get an emotional response, because it's good writing and it's good music. But really, like, that full emotional, intimate performance experience comes from watching it. And I haven't even had the pleasure of watching it live, which I could imagine is, again, a totally different experience. But being able to see their faces combined with the music and the visual that they're doing, I think that really helps kind of tie it all together. And I don't think we're projecting the emotional kind of human nature of what they're doing. I think they are doing that through their performance, and that, I think, goes all to the members of that group. I mean, they just do such a good job of buying into the programs that they're given and really finding something within themselves to project onto the show that they're given, which makes it just an incredible experience for the audience.
Right.
At this point, it seems just like one small aspect of kind of a greater picture that's happening. DCI, we'll see a lot of this stuff in DCI as well. I mean, they do write for Blue Knights, and you see it in other groups as well. It's not just them. But it feels like WGI is kind of starting to take a left turn off of what was kind of a similar path in terms of kind of the idiom, minus the horns and the color guard and the field. But when people are designing these shows, and again, Broken City is just kind of the figurehead for this, but you can see a lot of out stuff happening in like Ayala, which I know you're a fan of as well. But in terms, I guess you were talking about how WGI was introducing you to things you haven't really paid attention to, such as like dance. I think is probably a big one, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Um, and that's where I think it's kind of starting to take a turn, because when I see kind of choreography done from like a marching percussionist perspective, I mean, it's obviously essential, and there's a lot of moves, that pertain to the drum when we're moving, and all that stuff that need to be understood from a teaching standpoint and a design standpoint so that it all functions. But when it comes to literally dancing, it kind of breaks out even from a color guard idiom, and it turns to just legitimate contemporary dance. And that's actually, at this point, I think is one of my favorite kind of aspects of what's going on. Because we do have, this one aspect of, for example, the human nature-based shows being expressed through the actual writing. It's very expressive. The type of music that's being chosen and written. But I mean, the dance is kind of what makes what could be an abstract concept very tangible when they're seeing these shows. And since they can see their faces, they can kind of interpret the motions a bit more easily, since it's, in front of them as opposed to coming through their ears. It's just a more physical experience. And I think one of the things I'm looking forward to in the future is people just exploring this to no end and continue to take the left turn from the previous path. But the thing that I question is, how long will it take for WGI to fully accept these ideas once people start going that direction kind of as a mass due to the rules? I mean, I think people are always consistently trying to, especially reinterpret like the general effect caption, not only adjudicate abstract concepts, but adjudicate them in an abstract way that can be done in writing. I mean, a lot of these groups are trying to stay afloat, and, if they're not consistently winning because they're really trying to push the boundary, then it's kind of hard to continue to be a program and keep interest. It clearly is going to take a lot of people achieving at a high level. But one thing I noticed, because all these groups seem to be trying to go this route, but don't quite get there. We always have a long way to go as well, but people are trying to approach these human nature concepts kind of still in the same mindset as when people are creating these more, I guess, typical shows. So a big part of me wonders when people are using, for example, Mike Jackson inspired writing, if when they're writing and teaching, that they themselves also fully understand kind of the purpose of that writing and the place it's coming from. I mean, if you try to just write big roughs and stuff and all this texture stuff with the piccolo tips from just a kind of a mathematical standpoint, I feel like it might not quite connect.
I think the number one question there comes from, like say we're taking like a show, you see a show, and it seems like they're trying to do that kind of thing, but it doesn't come across the right way, or it's not effective. Like they're either it's not being achieved, or it's not, just doesn't feel right. It's just not effective for whatever reason. And then, you're asking the question of, like, you wonder if the people who are writing that or teaching that really know why that's the case. And I think that comes down to the question of, why is the show being designed the way it is? Are you trying to copy something that you think is cool, or are you actually doing something that you believe in that makes sense to you as a person and as a designer? Because I don't think there's any way for someone to sit down, and write a show trying to sound like Broken City because they think it's good and they want to be like that. You can't sit down and write that show and have it be effective. You just can't, because there are so many factors into what make the great groups great, and it's not any one thing. So you can't sit down and say, well, if I write like that, we'll be good. And especially if it's outside of your comfort zone. Like I touched on this a little bit earlier, but like I don't sit down and when I write a show, I don't try to copy anything. Like I really don't. And that might come as a shock, because half the time you can very obviously see the influences from what I write back to what I'm influenced by, but that's really what it is. I kind of equate it to like improvisation, like a jazz student when they're learning how to improv the very first time. Like what are they told? You got to listen. You got to listen to the greats, you know. And then the next step is, okay, so now you have to transcribe that and really get inside of it. And then you have to learn to play it. But that, you can do all of that. You can listen to 1,000 records, you can transcribe 1,000 solos, and you can learn them all. But when you go to step up and solo yourself, if you're thinking, okay, I got this chord, such and such, and I have to now take this, Charlie Parker did this thing over this chord, so I'm going to play that here, and then Miles Davis did this over this next chord, so I'm going to put that lick in here. Like, it's not going to work. You can't, it's super contrived, and it's like a puzzle. You're trying to fit in all these things. The point of transcribing and getting inside of all that material is not so that you can do that. It's so that you can learn the vocabulary and make the vocabulary part of who you are, so that when you go to speak with your voice and tell your story, you have the vocabulary in which to do so. And I think writing these shows is very much the same way. Like, you can't sit down and think, well, I really liked this moment of Broken City's show last year, so I'm going to put it here in my show, and it's going to be cool. It doesn't work like that. Like, I absolutely check out all of these shows that I like, and not just Broken City, not just WGI, not just marching percussion. Like, I take all sorts of music and things like that I like, and I do sit down, I do transcribe a lot of stuff, I learn things, and I try to get inside of that vocabulary.
Right.
So that when it comes down to me writing something, I can say, okay, here's what I want to say. How am I going to say that in my own words? And I have the words, the musical words in which to do so. I have all of the different possible ideas and vocabulary that I could want because I've learned all these other things.
Right.
And then they do show themselves. I mean, you're going to look at, I don't think we could take any show in WGI or DCI or marching band for that matter. I don't think there's a single show in existence that has 100% original vocabulary.
Yeah, that's you could equate that to like the saying, like standing on the shoulders of giants, right?
Right.
Kind of taking it and going somewhere else with it, going further with it.
But the why you're doing it, I think, is the key ingredient. Like,
Right.
Are you just arbitrarily, mindlessly copy pasting ideas, or are you using them to say something original? The words might not be original, but the idea, I think, has to be.
What I think is interesting too is that there's a lot of different types of personalities when they view these shows, whether they be more in the abstract and more kind of in what we've seen, what we know. There's a lot of personality types that I think would immediately be attracted to stuff that is more standard and straightforward. You know exactly what's going on, and of course the judges' sheets were really pointed in that direction just because it makes sense. I mean, we started out without electronics, without dance. It was all straight ahead. It's hard to get too crazy when all you got is just the physical stuff. There was no sound effects. There was no narration to guide you through things. That certainly made everything a lot easier once that came into play, to do stuff that was a little more out of the box. But yeah, so there's personalities that would love everything too, and I think those personalities that try to just go towards kind of this more modern style that's happening without understanding it is just kind of like also not just being true to themselves. Sometimes they just need to go with what they like. But it's hard too. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of, you probably took like a psychology test in like one of your psychology classes in high school or college or whatever, like the Myers-Briggs test, which you could say is kind of just all BS. It's more so like a theory than anything. But for example, like my type is INFP. So when I view not just like WGI, but really everything, I base it off of kind of this main function called introverted feeling. And essentially what that means is that I base all my values and how I interpret reality based on literally like my internal feelings about things. I don't necessarily express them. I just kind of like, it's kind of like an information collective system. But when I view things like movies, for example, I talked a lot about this in my first podcast. It's like, when I watch movies, I can enjoy like a comedy for sure, like 9 times out of 10. But the stuff that I'm kind of looking to watch and kind of consume is all either based in feeling or it's just really abstract in nature. It's not giving you anything. You kind of just have to interpret it. And when I look at a piece of art, I'm kind of wanting to be able to interpret it and not have it kind of thrown in my face. There's kind of like an example of some movies where they are a little experimental, but then they kind of give you all the answers in the end. It kind of ruins it, which is not that great. For me, when I look at movies, I also equate those and kind of their tone to how I wish WGI was. I'm a fan of horror movies. There's a movie that was a remake that came out recently called Suspiria. The original, I think, was an Italian horror movie, like the 80s. That's really iconic. And someone remade it with kind of like the vibe and the general idea in mind, but kind of changed the whole thing. And it revolves around this, it's kind of like a witch coven that's disguised as a dance company. And no one there really knows it, but once you're like in the dance company, you kind of start to get a feel for it pretty quick. But the way that the movie shows it is it's like this kind of clear idea. Okay, it's a dance company, and we kind of find out early on there's witches involved, but they're not necessarily exploring that idea so much. They're kind of touching on just like scenes that will make you feel something or experience something that kind of goes beyond just the visual medium. Like they're combining dance, which is the cool part, which is kind of why I relate it to WGI right now, with music that was done by Tom York, which was actually great, from Radiohead. And it just kind of it evokes a vibe. And when I watch a WGI show that's maybe older, it almost feels like the exact opposite of that, and it's like not necessarily something I want to see, just because that's me and that's how I view things. But when I see or when I'm looking towards the future of this activity, it seems so obvious to me that we can take aspects from, not just Suspiria, but just movies in general that kind of invoke these interesting feelings that we may never felt before, and just apply that. And that is not an easy thing to do or say to anybody, or to kind of like try and describe. And, if you try to bring that up in a design meeting, could be really scary to most individuals that maybe don't see the world that way.
Or at least definitely not the activity.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, I could name 10 people that I know personally right now that would completely disagree with everything that you just said.
Yes,
and
I do too.
not because they're like jerks or whatever, not because they don't know what they're doing, not because they're like whatever, but just simply because, I mean, really, the activity doesn't work that way right now. It doesn't. It doesn't
Exactly.
reward that kind of stuff. And you can't blame people for saying, well, we're putting a lot of money into this.
Exactly.
These kids have to pay a lot of money to do this. They're looking for a successful experience. It's not all about winning, but at the end of the day, it kind of is. And, because you can't have, especially independent organizations. I think high school groups have a lot more freedom because as long as the school is on board, then the kids don't have a choice. I mean, they're there. They either do the program or they don't. But the independent groups, they have to compete with each other for membership. So it's like you can't lose every single year and expect to have a long-running successful program.
Right.
And the judging sheets do not allow for a whole lot of abstract thought right now. And so you can't blame people for, I don't even think they're scared of that stuff. I think they just feel that it's, the activity works a certain way. You have to do certain things, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was trying to say before, too, with trying to keep groups staying afloat and all that. I think you're right. I think the high school level is probably where, I think it currently is where a lot of the growth comes from, the activity, not just the kind of top groups that keep winning. And I guess, yeah, it kind of brings back questions, kind of what I was trying to bring up earlier as well. How do we get to a point, or will we ever get to a point where this type of stuff is more often explored, and also, not that it's not allowed, but kind of allowed to be successful? And I think, clearly, there's a bit of a formula that does work. when we look at Broken City's show this past year and the past couple years, I mean, they were not just accepted by people that are into the fact that the show is only to be interpreted by the individual, but the people that are kind of the opposite end of the spectrum that want to know everything, we're also buying into it fully. I mean, there's still people that were not like, okay, why is this winning? Or they were like, okay, why is this winning right now? But they won the judges over. They won a lot of the community over. Their lot at finals was probably the most insane thing I've ever seen in my life. So it when I saw that, it made me beg the question, like, okay, where are we at now? Like, if this is so highly accepted, granted it was achieved in every aspect very, very well.
And I think that's what needs to come first, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think that anybody can be successful with that type of show right now unless it's achieved at the absolute highest level. And that's what Broken City is doing. You know, they're moving and they're playing and they're performing at the highest possible level. It's the word that we always use, like teaching in the activity. It's undeniable, right? Like you have to be. If you're someone new on the block, or you're not the same old team that always wins, you need to be undeniable in order to get that credit.
Right.
And I think that can be transferred to, if you're not the same old show style, if you're not the same old design concept, then you need to be undeniable. And I think that's what they're starting to do. And I think we will see change, like widespread change over the next couple of years in the activity.
Yeah.
Like we're not there yet, but I do think that give it 5 years, and it's just like 5 years ago to now. I think it's going to be a completely different landscape than it is right now. Yeah,
I agree. I feel like I can't put a full finger on exactly what's going to cause that. I think, I didn't really feel the way I do now until after WGI and having the experience and kind of seeing the judges there. Because not that our show at Newtown was so crazy. It was definitely not exactly what was normal on our class level or the scholastic level. People are starting doing a lot of other wild things too. But some of the feedback we received from kind of the top WGI officials and some of the judges was really surprising in terms of how much they liked what we were doing and also gave credit for it. And it was like a hard split between the kind of two ideologies of what's going on right now. And I didn't really believe that things were going to get pushed at all in a more abstract direction till I heard those comments, and from people that I think we've both respected for a long time, and maybe didn't even expect to say those things. And that's why we first saw, we went from I think 4th to 18th, was it? Which is wild. I mean, that's not
like
just
that,
difference of. I mean, it is an extreme of difference in opinion.
I think it's simply a difference in opinion, and going back and listening to those tapes, it's one of those things where, like, that's something that could never happen on the independent level.
Oh no, yeah.
Like if a group like RCC or somebody got 4th one night and 18th the next night, somebody would get fired.
Yeah. No,
but
absolutely.
At the scholastic level, like, that stuff happens all the time.
Yeah.
We weren't the only group it happened to this year, and it happens every single year, because, like, you go out there and these people are seeing you for the first and, like, maybe the last time in some cases.
Yeah.
And they have no idea. They have no preconceived notion of who you are and what you do. It's just you're another high school group from another town in the United States or wherever, and they're just going to judge exactly what they're given. And I think that's almost a more realistic and more. I think that's a great way to be judged. I think
I do too. It's actually
because
really cool.
There's no external factors other than that person's opinion of what they're seeing right now in this moment.
Yeah. Just sitting there.
We saw very clearly how certain people feel about what we were doing. And part of the reason why I think that we will continue to see a lot of change in the activity over the next couple of years is because a lot of the people who were into it were younger, and a lot of people who were not were older. And for better or worse, I mean, it makes sense. I'm sure when we're older, we're going to be stuck in what we're doing now, and there's going to be some crazy thing that we don't like as much either. Mm-hmm. But I think as the judging community gets filled up with more people who are just living and inspired by more recent trends in the activity, I think we're going to see some change in what's acceptable, from a judging standpoint, which will then make a lot of those people that teach and design shows solely based off of the judging sheet. It'll make them start changing their tune, because a lot of those people that I know that do that, they're not doing it because they think it's like the most artistic way to do things. They're doing it because they want to keep their jobs.
Yeah, right.
And there's nothing wrong with it. It's, in a lot of ways, it's smart.
Of course.
These people know how to get results, and I think when we see the judging and the sheets change, favoring a more artistic and abstract way of doing things, I think we're going to see a lot more people designing that way.
Kind of coming out of the woodwork.
Right. Because I think there's a lot of people right now who are very into that idea, but like you said, they're afraid to do it.
Yeah, just there's so many reasons to be afraid of that too.
And I think that's why we gravitated so heavily towards it when we started with Newtown. At least I know I did, because I wasn't afraid to go in, completely tank, and then leave.
Yeah.
I had been, only teaching for maybe 6-7 years, and I'd been at 5 or 6 different programs in that time, right? And I was pretty over it. I was I don't really love doing this anymore. I'm just kind of doing it because I need something to do.
Yeah, right.
And, Ricky called me up and he said, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. Let's give it a shot." And that was completely my mindset going into that first year. It was just like, let's just have some fun. Let's just go for it. And that was reflected completely in my writing style and my teaching style. I was just 100%. Let's just have some fun. Let's try to be good, but let's not worry so much if we're not.
Yeah.
Let's try to do something that we think will work, but let's not be afraid that it won't.
Right.
And honestly, the last 2 years designing the indoor show, when I would send it out to you guys, the number one thought in my head was, this is terrible. This is not going to work. I don't know what I'm doing. This, I've never heard or seen anything like this before, and that must be a bad thing.
Yeah.
The kids aren't going to like it. It's not going to be achievable. The judges aren't going to know what the hell's going on. It's going to be a huge disaster.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't. Everybody loved it. The first year, everything was super successful. But still being new to indoor, there was still a couple things that we had to iron out and learn about simply just doing what we do indoors. And then this past year, we learned a little bit more of those kind of guidelines. And I still thought wow, this show is terrible. We're the music we picked isn't gonna work. And yet it was funny because I think every single piece of music that we picked, all 3 of us were like, this isn't gonna work.
Yeah.
But we're still gonna pick it. This is definitely what we're gonna use.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not gonna work. But we're still gonna go with it. We're not gonna try to find something else. Mm-hmm. And then we did it, and I was sitting there scratching my head in the coffee for 6 hours. I think I wrote 8 bars of music in that time. And I was like, what the hell? This doesn't work at all. And 2 weeks later, I came back to it, and I was like, wow, this is pretty bad, but these kids need music, so I'm just gonna send it.
Yeah.
And then it worked. Everybody was super into it. like from the get-go. I sent it to you guys, and you guys are like, wow, this is cool. Like, this is so different. The kids were like, wow, this is fun. Like, this is our own thing. And the judges too, they're wow, you guys are playing well, and you're really different than everybody else. That's cool. It's refreshing. So
Yeah.
I think it's a weird common trend. Like you said, like I don't really remember when I realized that these kids could play. Or how good their attitude was that first fall season. I remember them telling me they had never played accent tap before, and I was like, what? And I was really concerned. One of the first rehearsals. And then I don't know at what point, I think it must have been like a little bit after we went outside for the first time that things started happening. I don't even think at that point I was really aware. I don't think it hit me till the end of the season what they could actually do, because I never just expected anything.
To be honest with you, I don't think I realized it during the season at all.
Yeah.
I think the first time I really realized that, what was happening was at a significantly higher level than what I was used to was going back and watching old videos, and then watching a video of the show from that year and just being like, wow, that's such a huge difference. Because every year that I taught, my brain would kind of simultaneously find all like the really bad things and all the really good things.
Right.
And everything kind of like balanced out.
It averaged out,
my
right?
interpretation, like, and then so when we were teaching at Newtown the first year, like the standard was different, but I didn't even realize it because I was still seeing the good things, but also seeing all like the really bad things. Because that was just what we were surrounded by at that time. So like the standard of what they were playing and how they were playing was judged only against themselves in that moment.
Yeah.
And I don't think I really realized that it was actually pretty freaking good until well after the season was over.
That's pretty profound. Even as a general concept, like even if you're like just an artist in general or something, I mean, I think that's the mindset that pretty much most people have when they look at what they're doing. Just take all the negatives and try to get the positive, and it just balances out to like, well, this is something. and it's like you don't even when it's good, you don't know. You just don't know as subjective or objective as you try to be.
It's dangerous because you know what, it can do exactly what you just said. Like if something is good, you don't even realize it. Like a lot of times that can be a good thing, right? Like you can be humble about something, but that can also be damaging in a way too. And then
right.
on the flip side of that, if something is really bad and like you don't realize it, that can also be a negative thing.
Yeah.
But then it can also be positive. I mean, I think the reason I started kind of operating like that when I was teaching high school groups was because like I was teaching some pretty bad high school groups. There was some of the drum lines I was teaching, like they were not playing at a high level. These kids were coming in with absolutely no experience. Some of these kids were coming in as freshmen, literally not knowing how to hold sticks.
Yeah.
And I was tasked with making something out of that. Like these kids have to wear drums and like march around the field and like play together, and they don't even know how to play by themselves.
Yeah.
So I was kind of like, my head was in a cloud about it because I was just like really digging in to each specific set of kids. And that was just kind of how I learned how to teach. And then stepping away from that, I can look back and say, oh, wow, like this wasn't as good as I thought it was, or this wasn't as bad as I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with Newtown, it was definitely that way. I think after the season was over, I was like, wow, this was actually a lot better than I thought it was in the moment. Because in the moment of teaching, I think it wasn't any better or any worse than any other group I'd ever taught. It was just the same.
And what I'm wondering, because, as opposed to someone that might be like a visual artist or something that, is having their own version of that kind of experience, working on something for so long, maybe starting out for the first time, do you think you'd have the same opinion on certain things when you look back necessarily, if we weren't given a platform and judged and being thrown in kind of the mix with the judge community of people that we know and some people that we really respect, giving us positive opinions or negative opinions, do you think that heavily influences how you look back at things?
I mean, I think it has to. I think it has to play a role. It's not something that I've actively thought about, to be honest with you. It's a good question.
Right. Because I don't know necessarily. Oh, go ahead.
No, you. I don't really know.
So I don't.
So I feel like I don't necessarily know if I would have. I mean, it's hard to know, but if I would have looked back at that first season with Newtown, and realized how good it was, unless we were getting that feedback from people. So I mean, you kind of exist in a vacuum, and it's not really the judging part and just having the affirmation that's necessarily validating. I think it's validating to know that people just in general look at it and they don't think it's garbage. They're actually like, they have like some kind of response to it that maybe is more than just kind of melancholic in nature. They actually see it and they're like, oh, like that's cool. And it kind of changes their day, at least.
Yeah, I think validating is a good word for that. I don't think the opinion that other people had necessarily changes or has changed or would change the way I felt about it, because especially by the end of the winter season, I mean, I felt pretty damn good about what we were doing, just simply because it was fun. I think that was the first indicator that first year that was the first big indicator that things were going well, was that it was fun. I was no longer coming home thinking, man, I hate doing this.
Yeah.
But it's what I do, so I have to keep doing it. Like I was actually really legitimately enjoying it and looking forward to it, and really legitimately proud of the work that the kids had put in and what they were able to do. And I think for the first time ever as a teacher, I legitimately felt like I simply facilitated what the kids were doing instead of like forcing something upon them and saying, this is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to do it. It's going to kind of suck, but we're all going to make it through the season alive.
Yeah, for sure.
For the first time, it felt like I, presented the kids with the music, and we worked together and had a fun time teaching them. But ultimately, I think they took everything and ran with it. And I think a lot of the success that they had was 100% on them, and I was very proud of that. So I don't necessarily think that, had we like tanked in the scores, I don't think I would have felt any differently about what we were doing.
Right.
But there is a certain like level of external gratification and validation that comes from knowing that what you're doing is also affecting audience members. Because at the end of the day, the judges are just audience members too, right? So if they come back and they legitimately enjoyed the program and said, wow, that was like refreshing and I really enjoyed that, and it's genuine and you can tell that they really mean that, then that's definitely meaningful, I think, and it definitely impacts the way you look back on something for sure.
Yeah, and I think that actually segues pretty well into kind of one of the last points I wanted to make. Something else I talked about was, I guess, the moving forward with design. I feel like a lot of it has to do with whether or not the show is kind of purposely made to really connect to the audience, or if it's just meant to be this thing that you watch that's entertaining. So I mean, we definitely did the previous, or the former, where we were getting visceral reactions from people that were watching the show. And I think that just because that's fully the intent, like if you design something specifically in every nook and cranny to connect to at least one person in the crowd every time you have a show, and they genuinely feel that emotion, I mean, that's really the most validating thing to me that could happen. I think that's why a lot of us, really weren't worried about any of the scores we had this past season, because at most shows, sometimes across the board, people had very strong response to what we were doing, or at least one part of what we were doing, which was really weird. We had no idea that was going to happen. I think Tom's River was kind of the first time we were like, what? Just hearing what people had to say about certain moments and things like that. But I think if people are coming from this kind of more introverted internal side, this kind of more intimate side of designing a show, I feel like that's got to be one of the key factors to getting across abstract stuff. I mean, because if people are at least given enough information to understand the general concept and connect to it in some kind of way, which really is all to the achievement of the design and the performance, it really all has to come together smoothly for that to happen. That's pretty incredible. I mean, I think it's the same thing I'd think about with songwriting. Like, if you make any kind of art in general, one person has that genuine response, like I was saying, I mean, that's extremely validating. It's like you positively affect someone's day, or at least a moment in their life, authentically. That's how I feel when I look at other art. If that happens to me, it's kind of like the same effect. Like if I watch a movie that has an effect on me and I genuinely feel that authentically, then that, again, it has the same kind of feel, which I think is really cool. But I don't know if we necessarily get a lot of that happening, because that is so hard to do, especially when it's just drums and marimbas and vibraphones and speakers.
5 minutes to get your point
and
across.
5 minutes, which is the big thing, not 2 hours. My last podcast really revolved around the idea is like, it's going to be hard to get there unless the medium continues in this left turn and latches on to dance and starts implementing kind of sound design focused shows, not necessarily because they're focused on what's coming out of the speakers, but because kind of sound design in general is a little bit even less tangible than drums in a gym. You can pump cool things through them, but to make them integrate with what's going on in a meaningful way that has impact is not easy. I mean, even the way we design shows is pretty interesting. I mean, sometimes it's a dance idea or electronic idea, or you have a drum thing or a front ensemble thing. We just kind of go off that. And if I'm writing like electronic parts, I don't necessarily look at it as I'm writing sound for a WGI show. I'm just kind of writing music how I would write music normally. And then we kind of divvy that up to front ensemble and what the synths play. And then maybe you're like, oh, well, I can do this to fit the phrasing better here, and the battery or the front to kind of make it all cohesive. I think we just kind of hit gold in a lot of areas, just naturally, which I don't know why.
I mean, I think a big part of it is simply that, exactly what you said. Like, you're not necessarily trying to play by the rules. You're not necessarily saying, okay, I need to write a good WGI show moment here.
Yeah.
Insert good 2-minute moment here. We don't really write like that. I don't think we ever could write like that. I don't think we have the experience in the activity to do that. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I sit down and write, like there's definitely certain rules, certain parameters that I think about. Like you can't write a bunch of big unison fortissimo moments. You can't write a bunch of gawk shots, things like that, because you're in a gym. It doesn't work. Like there's definitely certain parameters that you have to follow. Understand. Which definitely, like the first couple years I was designing indoor shows, I didn't really understand that stuff yet.
Same.
So, because fall and DCI, outdoor stuff, and indoor is not the same kind of presentation format. But I think once you understand those parameters, those external guidelines, then I think it's time for you to just write whatever you want. And I think that's what we do.
That's a good point.
Like, and it's very fluid the way we've been designing these shows, where it's like there's no one set way of doing it. Like you said, sometimes you'll just write some electronic music, send it out. Sometimes you do it specifically because that's a moment that we're going to have in our show, but sometimes you just send it out like, hey, here's kind of like a backdrop inspiration for this moment.
Yeah. Now we got the end of the show. That was The whole end of the show was.
So last year was not supposed to be the end of the show when we wrote it.
Yeah, it was kind
And
of
then
like.
we heard it and we're like, no, that's the end.
Yeah.
No, that's the end of the show. And it was a weird way to end a show. It was something that we were like no, it has to end with like a big crash, boom, bang, and we're done. Like it has to be that way. But then we heard this thing. I was like, no, I don't. Like after I hear that, I don't want to hear more. I want to sit there. I want to think about it a little bit, and then I want to be done.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And it took a lot of convincing. I know when we first brought that to Ricky, it took a lot of convincing to say, hey, we're going to end the show with like a 1.5-minute long snare feature with like just piano underneath it.
And like singing and stuff. And it's funny because when I did that part, I mean, I was just trying to come up with ideas, but it's no different than when I try to write a song. It's literally the same. I mean, I was literally singing on it. It's like, oh, Fly Me to the Moon, that's cool. If I just change the melody a little bit and then put some chords under it. But when I do that stuff, I guess I don't give credit to the fact that, I've been trying for so long to interpret it's like internal feelings into something that can be heard. I've got a lot of practice doing that. So, I mean, that's not something that everyone has. So when they try to make that type of moment, it comes from a different place. And I'm just genuinely trying to take the mood of that moment and, I guess, extract how I personally view that mood and make it fit inside the show, even if it feels jarring. I mean, it ended up working. There's no pacing problems. It was kind of weird how that worked out. But, yeah, it's interesting. There's so many different things going on for whatever reason. Just from all the personalities, and they seem to be working. And again, it's like striking gold. I mean, it's not just the writing, or like kind of you're saying before, it's a lot more than just the design. There's the members, the personality of the members, there's the director, having a good parent base, having a good band program, having a great band director, that all kind of intertwines with it. But yeah, I don't know, it's all very cool.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the number one way to know if something is working is, how do you feel about it? Does it feel good? And
Yeah.
I think that applies to like everything in life, right? But with the design of the shows, it's like when I sit down and write, I don't try to overcomplicate it. I don't try to over computer analyze, orchestrate it. I just say, I think that sounds good. I think that feels good. I think that's cool. And then, when you're teaching, like, if the vibe in the room is good, if everybody's having a good time, you're feeling good about what you're doing, then chances are, you're doing something right. And I think that likewise for the audience. If the audience can watch your show, whether they understand it or not, I think if they feel good, and that good doesn't necessarily mean happy, right? Because sadness, feeling sadness, or fear or anxiety, during a program, that can be good too.
Oh yeah.
But I think if people feel good when they're done watching the show, then something worked. Win, lose, or draw, clean, dirty, otherwise, I think if people are feeling good, then you're on the right track. That was the biggest takeaway I had from this past season, was it just seemed like everybody was happy all the time, which especially when you're dealing with high school kids, and I'm sure it's not the case. I'm sure there was plenty of drama that I was not privy to, being a couple states away. But it's like when you have such strong energy and such a strong positive vibe coming from the program as a whole, then good things are bound to happen. So.
Yeah. And I think it's funny, like, I don't know if you saw John and Mark's grid book video with John Mapes. It was like a real quick thing. They pose a question like, how are your kids so confident? Like, what did you do? It's just like, well, we just set them up for that. I mean, he was describing, if we're making a change, like, we'll do it ahead of time. So when they're in the show, no one's worrying about it.
Yeah, watching that interview was hilarious. I was laughing through almost the whole thing because
it was so matter of fact.
He had was so simple.
Yeah,
it was so simple, and it was so just like you kind of like hit yourself in the forehead. And you're like, duh. And I think I'm paraphrasing totally because it's been a while since I've seen that. But I remember they asked him one question that was just like, you guys must, pay your staff more, and you must have this huge, like, world-class staff, and you must, like, have all this rehearsal facilities, and you must rehearse every day. And he's like, no, we do the same thing everybody else does.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
literally.
I mean, granted, they definitely are set up for success more than certain programs, of course.
Oh, sure.
But like, there's no magic water. There's no special ingredient. There's no secret sauce. They're just, they're just really good at what they do.
I mean, John was out there for years. I mean, he was teaching for a long time. I think he was talking about how, he was looking at himself and realizing all the things that he was doing wrong that was causing his programs to not be successful. Once he started kind of getting the ball rolling on that, things started to improve right away. Just trying not to ignore that aspect, which plays a huge role. Same thing, like, if it's just kind of like the way your presence is in front of everyone kind of affects their own presence and, an environment in general. Rehearsals are a good representation of that. I think now there's a lot of silliness and goofiness, but there's also the professional approach at the same time, which I've never really experienced anywhere else being achieved correctly. And I think it's just kind of just the balance that we had coming in, because, like you're saying, we weren't trying to change the game, trying to come into this school. We were just like, all right, let's do it. See what happens, And I think that ended up being the answer to a certain point.
It was the answer to the question. Like I had been asking myself every single year, what am I doing wrong? What's the secret? And then, I mean, this almost sounds like a terrible, like, cringy cliche, but it was like, it was not trying so hard.
Yeah.
Not that we didn't try hard, because we put a ton of work in at Newtown. I think it was the most work I've ever put into a program, but it was work. It was not emotion. Like, it wasn't like a personal need. Like, I wasn't going in saying, I'm, putting myself into this so that I can be successful. It was, okay, these kids need a solid warm-up foundation, so I'm going to put the work in, and I'm going to write a ton of warm-ups, and I'm going to, like, really sit down and think about, like, I'm not going to play this accent tap exercise because I think it's cool and the cadets did it. Like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to think, because I have done that before, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
But you put in the work to sit down and say, what do these kids need? Where do I want them to be? What do they need to get there? And then what do I need to do to give that to them? And that's what I think we did. And it was not a personal, emotional kind of thing. It was very much just like, all right, we're going to go in, we're going to teach, we're going to do the best we can, and we're going to have fun. I think the fun factor is huge. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine, like, I look back on some of the experiences I had as a student, and some of the experiences I had as a teacher early on in the first couple of years. Like, I look back and I'm, like, disgusted at the fear factor that was integrated into it all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the teaching through fear, and the idea that you should be scared to make a mistake, or the idea that you should be, worried that, if you're going to get yelled at if you do something wrong. And I think that idea is just so terribly backwards.
Mm.
And now, I mean, I can't even fathom as a current performer, somebody, my job now is to play the snare drum, and I can't possibly imagine doing that job well if I was scared to make a mistake.
Oh yeah, it's a hard perspective to understand, 'cause I mean, I really bought into that stuff pretty heavily, and it took me years to kind of flip my mindset a complete 360, or on the 360 with 180, and pretty much all my views on everything are complete opposite. And I think just in general, I think we equate too much the experience as being a student to what it's like to be a teacher, and then things just get a little too out of place, and we're not, I guess, in the right mindset to do what's correct. It's definitely been interesting the past few years, just kind of learning to understand, there's always that kind of classic saying, like, you don't have to be the greatest player in the world to be an amazing teacher. You can be an amazing player, but be a horrible teacher. for many reasons, but yeah, it's all very interesting. Let's see here. I don't know if I had necessarily any other questions. I think we pretty much covered everything one way or another. Let's see here. Yeah, some of these we pretty much touched on. So I guess, so what's your, at least lately, what's your favorite movie and why? It doesn't have to be like your all-time favorite, just like one that you might have seen in the past few years.
That's actually an incredibly difficult question because I haven't been watching movies.
It could be a lifetime thing. It could be just one that you really like.
Wow. I never thought a question like this would be so difficult. I mean, if I'm going to go a lifetime, it's got to be The Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
Something that I can always come back to and say, yes, I love that movie, and I love it every time I watch it. The books too, like that whole world. I'm a huge fantasy nerd. I'm all about that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that whole book series and even the way they did the films, especially the way they did the films for modern day fantasy stuff, I think has been so defining that.
Yeah.
Even though I don't watch a lot of movies anymore, I could still turn that on and have a good time, for sure.
Okay. I think it's really hard for me to pick like a favorite in general for anything, like favorite movie, favorite book, favorite food. I mean, I can say that as I have like 3 James Blake records framed on my wall, but like I'm really like very just in the recent history. Like I definitely have movies that I love, but like the Suspiria movie that I saw recently has been one of my favorites that I've been thinking about. It's a really strange movie. But I think just because I like horror, I don't like the jump scare stuff at all. I don't really like that roller coaster ride aspect to it of just like being scared to just be scared. I think what I was trying to explain earlier that I really like about them is that they're just meant to be super creepy, for like 90% of the movie and just give this whole like unexplainable feeling. And because it was like a witch coven, they were like learning this dance that was meant to be a ritual, and no one knew it really. And just kind of like how they put everything together made it feel so weird. That's how I felt about like Hereditary and The Witch.
Stuff that just makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah, like so it's the fact that it can really make me feel that way. I can never put a finger on it. Like I was saying, it's just some weird subconscious thing that I like about it. Let's see. I don't know if I have another question here. I gotta have one. Maybe just an album or a song that you really like.
Album or song?
Could be favorite, could be recent.
The hard questions. Jeez. I mean, music for me is so come and go. It's so like, what am I into right now? What am I into?
Yeah.
What do I keep coming back to?
It could be that too. It could be something that you heard like last week.
Well, one thing I've been listening to a lot of classical music on like the NPR stations recently, so I haven't heard a whole lot of new stuff in the past couple of weeks. But something that I've just consistently been into, especially recently, is Pain of Salvation.
Oh yeah.
It's like a European progressive rock band.
Mm-hmm.
Been around for a couple decades.
Have they put something out recently? I know we would listen to a bunch of stuff.
Not in a few years.
Okay, so probably the last thing you showed me.
Yeah, I mean, and they're just one of those groups that I always like. Pretty much every single one of their albums is completely different stylistically.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can definitely in kind of one big sweep be defined as like a progressive rock band, but really every album is very, very different.
Was that the group where the singer had like a near-death experience or something, or was writing?
Yeah, the singer had some sort of like, it wasn't like a tapeworm, but he had some sort of flesh-eating thing where he was in the hospital for like a year or two. Like he almost died, and then he wrote this whole album. Like he writes all of their music, which is crazy because it's some pretty big scale stuff at sometimes. But he writes all their music. He wrote this new album that was like his inner like monologue of being on his deathbed. or at least what he thought
Mhm.
was his deathbed.
Yeah.
That's some really powerful stuff.
It's like Ryuichi Sakamoto is doing the same thing with his last album when he had cancer.
That's probably one that's on my recent, in terms of like new music that I've only recently discovered. That's got to be up there as well, for sure.
Mm.
I think music's probably the closest to where I have like a favorite lately. After I kind of discovered personality typing stuff, I've been looking at artists that have the same personality type as me, and it's been really interesting to hear what they have to say, because usually it's always there's nothing that's ever like catered to somebody. It's never like made up stuff. It's like notably Bjork, and there's a singer named Aurora. I think Tom York from Radiohead is the same personality type too. And I've kind of been exploring how they approach things, because I think that's probably the best way for me to bring out any ideas that I have, rather than trying to compare to so many things that are so different and are approached a different way. But it's funny, I'll try to like watch videos of them too, and they'll have kind of similar mannerisms. Like if I'm looking around or something, or like my eye movements, they're usually not sharp. They'll be like kind of sweeping, and everything's a little bit flowy, which is weird. Yeah, I always think that's funny. They're always weird. All of them are weird.
Can say that again.
But yeah, man, I think this probably should be where we stop. It's getting off the rails. And I think we're going on like an hour 10, hour 20, somewhere in there. So a little bit longer than I think we both expected. But I appreciate you taking the time out of the day to come on here, man. But I'll let you go, and I'm sure we'll talk later.
All right, take it easy.
When you serve your purpose, I think you serve that purpose.
You're in my blood, you're in my blood.